What a privilege to be back to Crossroads. You are our founding partner, and this church embraced a long-term mission strategy, not just a short-term mission trip, but made a commitment to be a partner with us over the years. And the work that you have done has been absolutely transformative. It's been real. We've seen enormous progress. When we first came here, we were in the middle of a major drought in Kenya, the second worst in its country's history. And we had been working with a number of government organizations and parastatals to open a gender-based violence center in Lodwar, Kenya. We came here. You sent a team that came over, and really it was a vision trip to see what the work would look like, and you embraced that ministry. And you are a very special congregation to me personally, and I'm so thankful to be here. Arizona, I met my wife in Arizona, and I continue to work in Arizona with a number of projects related to substance abuse and youth violence, and I'm on my way to the border this afternoon to meet with one of the wealthiest philanthropists in this country to talk about ways in which we can address the opioid crisis and some other issues. And so I find my way back to Arizona periodically, and any chance I have to be able to come alongside and worship with you is an opportunity. Today is Epiphany on the Christian calendar. And I want to just share with you, and then I'm going to share a few of the things that have been happening in Kenya, and then I'm going to return to the Epiphany theme. But Epiphany in the Oxford English Dictionary means usually a sudden manifestation or perception of the essential nature or meaning of something. It is the intuitive grasp of reality. It's something that breaks into our lives. We are surprised by Epiphany. And this day in the Christian calendar is the day we celebrate the arrival of the wise men, where they visit Herod. And Herod says, I've heard about this new king. Please go and find him and then come back to me and tell me all about him. And the wise men made their way to Bethlehem. A different religion. They were scientists, they were explorers, they were stargazers, they were visionaries. And when they arrived at the house of Mary and Joseph and met the child, their lives were forever changed. They were surprised. A light broke into their life. Let me share with you a couple of things. If I could have the first slide that indicates what you have done. We're going to talk about Herod and the child. The next slide, please. These are just some of the activities, this congregation, and I know one of the things that's difficult and sometimes frustrating about reporting out on mission trips, Kenya and Lodwar, where most of your work is being realized, as well as in Nairobi in our gender-based violence initiative, it's 8,000 miles away. And it's a great distance. We decided early on in our approach that 100% of any money we raised in the U.S. from our faith-based partners would go to support the mission. It would not go to overhead. We had a donor who was willing to match the overhead. So every penny you raise goes directly to mission. You helped build our Wings of Hope Center, which is a multi-room facility now where people gather. They're learning table banking. They're learning all kinds of activities related. And these are about 150 women that have been sexually assaulted or abused and are now finding refuge in their faith and in the support of what we do at the Wings of Hope Center. You have provided sewing machines. You've provided a number of things. You've supported our Hope Farm, which is about 18 acres of arid land. I have to tell you, I brought a number of American farmers to the Hope Farm, and they said the soil was no good, and they said the water is too salty. This just isn't going to happen. And then I brought an Israeli farmer, and the Israeli farmer picked up some soil in his hand, and he turned on the water at the solar water well, and then water came out, and the water was dripping in one hand, and the soil was in the other, and he goes, you have soil, you have water, this is paradise. And we started listening to our Israeli farmer. He started guiding us and directing in primal farming, and the kinds of watering that we could do and the way we could support the crops. Last year on watermelon alone, the women raised $20,000. $20,000. You support the Hope Farm. You make it possible. And these women are now coming, and we're supporting the broader community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. Women empowerment, where women who had been abused and beaten down and had lost their voice, could not afford to send their children to school or clothe them, are now able to clothe their children, send their kids to school. They're making amazing strides without us guys. They're doing it because they've developed a commitment and they've received support in a way that teaches them to be independent. We're doing social impact investing. We're starting a new enterprise. You donated 4 sewing machines. And now the sewing machine project is turning into, we've got 6 sewing machines, and soon we're going to have 10 sewing machines. And what they're wanting to do is they're not only tailoring clothing, but they want to develop their own Loadwar clothing design. I'm not sure what it's going to look like. I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to buy it. They want to develop their own clothing line. They have a fashion designer that's a part of them that used to live in Nairobi. She came home, was unemployed, and now she's teaching and guiding them in this process. That's a social impact investment. That is going to make its own money. We're seeing fishing enterprises emerge, where a woman who had lived in a hut now owns 4 apartments, employs 30 people in a fishing enterprise done through our table banking. These are individual examples of the kind of transformation that takes place. You're working with us in the Kakuma refugee camp, where every year we serve 10,000 children, partnering with Waldorf International, where we're doing psychosocial kinds of support activities. We're training the Church of the Nazarene in that camp to come alongside that ministry to provide support. You sent a medical camp last year that was just about to break our backs. It was a logistical challenge. And I said to my staff, I am so sorry. We will never do this again. And they said, are you kidding me? We now know how to do it. We'll do it again. But your church, you organized that medical camp. It was transformative. In fact, as I understand it, there are 4 or 5 babies in Kenya named Denise. And so, your legacy will live on. You're anchoring and supporting the church in its work. Next slide, please. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. That is your calling. You have made this happen. Next slide. This is the well, the second well. And I have to tell you about this well. This is a major social impact project. Our first well cost about $20,000, a solar well that dug deep. And it operates. We have yet to have to replace the pump, and that well is now 6 years old because of the kinds of technology that we used in the initial investment. But as the farm expanded and we started going into other crops, we put in shed nets and greenhouses to grow tomatoes. The water that it took to do that was taking the water away from the individual farmers that were working the land. And they told me that was a problem. We started a slow process, really, of raising some money because we knew the next system was going to be very expensive because we had to dig deep, but that it would last a long time. And also the community would be able to have access to it so we could extend our outreach beyond our immediate group and to proclaim the gospel to people outside of our farm itself. We raised $12,000 from Nashville First Church. An individual donor and supporter came through. We started raising money. I got up to $20,000. And I get a message from the farm. There are real hurt and pain taking place. The women can no longer afford to send their kids to schools. Their crops are not producing. We have got to get the second well in. And I said on the phone, and it was just one of those God moments, I said, I will have this to you by next week. I hung up the phone, and Colleen looked at me and she said, and how are we going to do that? And I said, I have no idea. Phone rings a couple of hours later, and it's Heidi. She says, how are things going? I explained the situation, what we were dealing with, and I told her about the situation. I said, I've got to get $10,000 more. And she said, well, Jim, you should have told me. We have $9,000 sitting here now ready to send to Kenya. I said, send it. You guys came through, and this is the result. The second well has been dug. It had to go over 300 feet deep. 30 solar panels will drive this. We're going to produce 7,000 liters of water an hour. Now the women are rejoicing. We're able to provide water for the livestock and the broader community. All of that happened within 30 days of Heidi's call. Is that your contribution, your reaction, and your response, we made some things happen. Next slide, please. On Thanksgiving Day, I was in Lodwar, and I was at the farm. And I'm sitting with a group of people, and I'm feeling kind of sorry for myself. It's Thanksgiving Day. I want to see my family. I wish I were home. I wish I were eating turkey instead of goat. I wish a whole bunch of things. And I'm sitting there lamenting this whole situation. And these generous, kind women came up, and this, I don't know if you can see this image clearly, but this woman knelt down in front of me, and she was thanking me. And I was so humbled and broken, I fell to my knees. And she said, you know, we're able now to feed our families again. The farm's being resurrected. I'm able to send my kids to school because of this second well. You've made a huge difference, and she's thanking me profusely. In a few moments, they had prayer, and they were praying, and Alex, our farm manager, standing next to me, interpreting the prayer, and they're thanking the Lord for me, and then he started laughing, and then I said, what's so funny? And he said, they're praying that you will live 20 more years so you can continue to bring things. I'll take the 20 years. Your gift, your sacrifice, your commitment, well, you may not see it day in and day out. It is transforming and touching lives. Next slide, please. This is an example of what your second well is supporting. This is a greenhouse that's now growing tomatoes and peppers. And the resources that are going to be able to generate, as they said, by the way, on the watermelon, they already have 2 years of contracts to sell to the hotels. They've got 1 year of contracts for the tomatoes. And so they've got a financial base now to support them. And when you go on the grounds and they worship and they pray and they thank the Lord for what's been done, they remember you in prayer. They know who you are and what you do and the sacrifice that you have made. It's so significant, the impact that this ministry is having now in that part of the country. It's becoming a model for other faith-based groups and how they approach doing agro-worship, as we call it. You know, tying our worship experience in with growing food and sustaining lifestyle. Next slide, please. These are the sewing machines. This is one of the women who are teaching the sewing to now 75 women. You know, I need more sewing machines, and they're coming in. And you started the sewing machine project for us, and now it's expanding. And they're setting up their tailoring businesses. Their table banking is being built around this, where they secure loans from each other. They don't go through a bank. They're creating savings accounts, which, by the way, savings accounts are the single most significant indicator of financial sustainability in the world of poverty. If you can get people to develop saving accounts, it's probably a good lesson for us here. If you can get people in the third world or developing countries to develop savings accounts, you've made a major turn on sustainability. And now we're doing that because of your work and your commitment. Next slide, please. These are three of our workers. They're heading out to the shed nets, and they're heading out to Nashville, built the shed nets. Greenhouses were built by individual donors that came in. And we're going to be able, as I said, now to grow tomatoes. And it's a combined technology using the skills that the women brought to this process to protect the plants by building little huts over the plants. And then the sophistication we gained from Israel Aid about what kind of farming to do in the wilderness. It's just been really exciting. And I am blessed to get to see this about 4 or 5 times a year when I'm in Kenya. And when that woman knelt down beside me or in front of me, I was praising the Lord for you, for Nashville, Nazarene Compassionate Ministries, and individual donors that have made this difference. And so I want to thank you for your work in this area. Next slide, please. So let's talk about Epiphany. That moment where we are introduced to a new idea, a new face, a new experience. We've all had them. And most of you, if not all of you, are here this morning because at some point in your spiritual journey, you had an epiphany. God in Christ Jesus broke into your life, revealed himself in some profound and committed way, and you responded. 1 John 4, 9, 10, and 11, it's not so much that we love God, dear brethren, it's that God loved us. And when we realize God's love for us, we are bound to love one another. And that word bound is from the Greek word automate. We will automatically respond because we see God's love toward us. I know as a 15-year-old, listening to the gospel in a church in Grandview, Missouri, just south of Kansas City, Paul Oriala was the missionary who preached that first night of a revival. And I heard the name of Jesus Christ. And I said, coming from a non-faith home, I want to know him. And went to an altar and met Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. Epiphany broke into my life. A light came on, and I began following every step that I could possibly take. You've had epiphanies. And it's all about the relationship. In fact, when the wise men show up, being politically sensitive, they show up and they go to Herod, the most powerful man in the Middle East. He was a ruthless man. He had a reputation and a history, and no doubt these intellectual, wise men had heard and knew of Herod because they make their way to him to inquire about this new king of the Jews. That in itself intimidated Herod. And he gathered his prophets around him and the teachers from the temple, and he asked questions, and he heard the prophecies. And so when the wise man inquired, he sent them, he's probably in Bethlehem. Go and see him, and then come back to me and tell me what you found. Well, when the wise men arrive, and they see in that house this young child, their lives were transformed. And things happened. We get on a road and we think we're on this particular path, and then God reveals himself and something changes, something alters. And they, through a dream and a vision, said, we're not going back to Herod. We're going to follow another road, a road that God had laid out. He is the road beneath our feet. He is the path. He is the way that we follow. That relationship with Herod was based on fear, intimidation, bullying, a relationship that threatened their very message, who they were and how they wanted to respond to this new child. But then when they saw the child, other things began to happen. That relationship dominated and took over. It's the same with us. I don't care where we go, whatever we do. And when I was 19 years old, attending Eastern Nazarene College, working with Campus Crusade for Christ, sharing my faith, and my assignment was MIT and Harvard. And talk about intimidating. Because I arrived at Eastern Nazarene College not as a scholar, but as a former football player. And I'll say no more about that. And finally, a professor got a hold of me and I said, I believe God wants to make me smart so I can talk about him more effectively. And he taught me to study. And he walked alongside me in this journey to really make me a student and a scholar. And I remember walking away from having a conversation with a group of Harvard students where I shared my faith, and two of them became followers of Jesus Christ. One of them eventually became the CEO of Coca-Cola Company as a follower of Jesus Christ. And I walked away from that experience. I felt this calling that God had placed in my life. You're going to do things and go places that most people don't do and go to. And I'm going to go with you. And it's going to be a rather amazing journey. And I have been blessed or privileged to meet with every president. Actually, because my grandmother was the president of the International Garment Workers Union, I've met with every president since Harry Truman as a child. And I have been able to share my faith in those environments, in those contexts, because God has placed me there. Brokering relationships between the public and the private. And never once being asked to surrender the message that Jesus gave me. But always looking for every child, such as 1 Peter 3:14 and 15 says, but sanctify Christ as Lord, and be ready always to give an answer to every man who asketh you the reason for the hope that is in you. But sanctify Christ as Lord, and then be ready always to give an answer. And so my goal was to create the question, to live and speak in such a way where the question would arise and epiphany would break out in those moments and those experiences. The other part about the epiphany and the wise men arriving is that it was disruptive. It was disruptive to everything and everybody around them. Yeah, this was a whole new thing. I was struck this past week when NASA announced, and these space engineers announcing that a satellite traveled 4 billion miles into space. And the excitement that the stars revealed to them as they discovered these new scientific discoveries and all the potential and all the promise that it had. And I was actually preparing this sermon when it hit me that the excitement that the wise men who were stargazers must have had when that star broke on the horizon. They were horizon thinkers. In fact, the satellite's called the New Horizon. I love the line in the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, in the first movie, where Captain Jack Sparrow is standing on the deck of his ship. And he says to his crew, bring me the horizon. Is that we're horizon thinkers. As followers of Jesus Christ, in our jobs, in our schools, in our vocations, wherever we work and serve, we bring the horizon. And that horizon is the name of Jesus Christ, his grace and his salvation wherever we go and wherever we work, whether it's in Lodwar, Kenya, whether it's in Washington, D.C., or whether it's in Phoenix, Arizona. Wherever we are bringing the horizon. I'm a sailor. And on one of my first cross-the-ocean sails, that moment when you don't see land again, and the sun is falling off the edge of the horizon as dark is approaching, and in the other distance you can start to see stars emerging. That feeling of uncertainty, but there's an excitement too that comes with it. When I first did that, we were using celestial navigation. We didn't have GPS. And so we're hoping and praying that our calculations were correct. That's what these wise men were operating on. The rumor, the truth, the knowledge, experience that they had, but they sought out a new horizon. And when they met Jesus Christ, when they met that child, Jesus, things changed. The horizon changed. It's disruptive. In fact, there's a concept in marketing called disruptive technology, where we're constantly looking for seeing how things change or alter. I learned about it for the first time. I was on a plane flying from D.C. to Dallas, and I had one of those moments where I had an upgrade. And I'm sitting next to a guy, and he's looking at my papers, and I was then working for the National Crime Prevention Council, and we had McGruff the crime dog on my letterhead. And he looked at me and says, "Oh, you in crime prevention?" I said, "I am." He goes, "Well, I'm in prevention." I said, oh, what do you do? He goes, I'm the chief design engineer for the Tomahawk cruise missile system. I went, whoa, I want your budget. And then he goes, yeah, I'm in prevention. He was attending a briefing, a post-action briefing where we had launched cruise missiles under the Clinton administration, and 2 of them misfired. And they were debriefing on what went wrong. And he asked me, he said, do you know the concept of disruptive technology? And I said, well, not really. I understand it from a marketing perspective. He said, well, years, centuries, thousands, millennia ago, 2 villages lived side by side. And then one village threw a rock into the other village, disrupting their way of life. And so they had to defend against rock throwing. Then somebody developed a crossbow, and they started shooting crossbows. So somebody had to develop a defense. And he just went throughout the progression of weaponry, and that was disruptive. Every new system creates a disruption. And he asked me a very challenging question. He goes, what's the disruptive technology in your world? Be ready always to give an answer to every man who asketh you the reason for the hope that is in you. So I started talking about my hope, and that I'm constantly looking for the Lord to lead me into new things. It's discouraging. I have to tell you, I rented a car here Friday morning. Because of where I'm going this afternoon and tomorrow, I was advised to get an SUV, and so I'm getting my vehicle. And so they said, we can upgrade you. And I said, well, how much is the upgrade going to cost? They said, well, it's going to be $175 a day. And I went, that's okay, I'll keep the same vehicle. And they said, but we're going to give it to you for $50 a day. I said, I'll take it. So I have in the parking lot, feel free to go by and look at it, it'll take you an hour. It's so big, a Yukon XL. And I'm constantly sensitive to distracted driving and no texting while you drive. But all the messages I get from this car are distractive. Don't pull in that lane, go straight, turn off this light, and the seat vibrates. I'm just like, what is that about? So I got all this new disruptive technology that I'm not used to in my Corolla. And I have to, if I'm going to drive this thing for the next 3 days, I've got to figure this thing out. And all the different distractions designed to make me safe begin to work in that car. That's amazing. Many of you may have similar vehicles, I don't know, but this is weird. And the first time that seat vibrated, I go, wow, what is that? But disruption is what we do. When Jesus came and he was born, it disrupted Herod's world. Who is this king of the Jews? I want to find him. And of course, we know the slaughter of the innocents was soon to follow. But those wise men said, no, we're not going to be a part of this. We're going to find another road and another way in which to live this life and to live it out. Let me close with this. In 1970, I applied for the Student Mission Corps for the Church of the Nazarene, a 3-month experience of missions. And I was assigned to Bolivia. And I was excited about the trip. Couldn't wait to get there. 5 of us on our team, and we flew into La Paz, Bolivia. And from the airport at 13,000 feet, we drove down into the heart of the city. And by the time I got to the heart of the city in the Nazarene Bible College, I said to the missionary who had picked us up, I have made a huge mistake. I want to be on a plane going home. In fact, I had seen a billboard. Remember Braniff Airlines? Braniff has 4 jets a week to the United States. I said, I want to be on one of those planes. I have made a huge mistake. And the missionary said, just relax. You're tired. You've been traveling. Get some oxygen. We go back to the village, or to the Bible college. We're having dinner with the missionaries. And I said 5 times, I'm going home. I made a mistake. And the door knocked, or somebody knocked on the door. One of the missionaries opened it, turned to Linda Spalding, a missionary nurse, and said, we got a guy out here who's cut his arm with a machete. She grabbed me literally by the collar and said, you come with me. So I went with her. We went out to this hut, opened up the hut, and it was a kind of a clinic, nursing station. She said, pull that box down. Pull the box down. It was missionary bandages that little old ladies roll up on those things back in the States, and they send these bandages off. And we treated this guy, and she shares Jesus with him, and we're talking with him. And all of a sudden I said, I got it. I'm ready. Forget all I've said. I'm here. An epiphany. 2 days later, she has me in a van. We're driving out to the countryside to a village called Warina. We see a woman and a child on the side of the road, and this woman is rocking back and forth with this child. We stop. Linda gets out. I follow her. And Linda just turns to me, and all she says, this child will be dead in 2 days. And I said, well, let's do something. She said, we can't do anything. It's too late. Get in the car. I get in the car, we go off, and I'm going, why did we leave this child? And there's something we could have done. We were a day and a half away from any kind of hospital or clinic. There was no way to get the child help. We drove back through, and so I said, let's stop and find out what happened. The child had died. And then furthermore, they were waiting for us to come back through, and the mother looked at me and said, I want him to preach the funeral. 19 years old. An epiphany breaks through. Jesus is in that moment. What will you do with me in this moment? What kind of hope will you proclaim? What kind of joy will you share with this mother? What kind of consolation will you bring? And I said to Linda, I said, I've never preached a funeral. She said, well, you're about to preach your first. Changed my life, and I'm standing here today because of those encounters where God led me into places that I never dreamed I would get to go. John F. Kennedy, on the floor of the United States Senate in 1958, said these words. I've altered them to modify them because I think it speaks to the church. He said, the Christian by nature is optimistic, experimental, an inventor, and a builder who builds best when called upon to build greatly. Arouse his will to believe in himself and give him a goal to believe in, and the Christian will create the means to reach it. This trait of the kingdom character is our greatest kingdom asset. It is time that we rescue it from the sea of fat in which it has been drowning. It is time that we get on with the business of being true to the work of a chosen people, a people who voluntarily assume the burden and the glory of advancing mankind's best hopes. That's who we are. We are kingdom people. We are kingdom people who look for every opportunity to experiment, to go where other people don't go, who voluntarily assume the burden and the glory. Nobody twisted your arm. Nobody begged or pleaded with you to give more money to Kenya. You heard a message somewhere, someplace, or a testimony from someone, and you said, I will go. I will commit. I will make this happen. Because when that newness breaks into our life and we see somebody either hurting or suffering, or we see somebody we come alongside them, we respond because we realize God's love for us. And what those wise men saw that day in a child was the hope of the nations. And that's what sees us today. Thank you for all that you do, for the service that you've rendered, for the commitment you've made to thousands of people in Kenya who are living today, and most are living abundantly today because of your commitment. God bless you.